I just put out a word titled, You're the main character, don't let the devil make you believe anything else or anything different. This is just another follow-up to that, because I forgot to add this part to that message, and the Lord reminded me as soon as I closed that video. He's also saying that even though it may be in the Lord's will for you all to play the roles and characters that are in his plan and designated for each of you, it doesn't take away from our actions and our words. So you would, even though like you're ahead, like I was saying in that video, and you're the main character, it doesn't absolve you of any type of sin, like anything that you're doing verbally, emotionally, mentally, physically, that would be considered unrighteous, right? And the same thing goes for your spouse and the counterfeit and any other counterfeits, right? Because that's your thing too, is that this kingdom spouse isn't necessarily just loyal, committed 100 with this counterfeit, right? This spouse, like I said in the last word, it's like the little one resorting back to crawling when walking becomes too difficult or challenging. And so the Lord is saying is that he likens that to like the spouse, is that they're when they're, it's like, okay, so the Lord is saying, when I think it's Peter was walking on the water, he was doing good when he kept his eyes on the Lord, on Jesus, but when he looked down and saw the water and saw what he was doing, he fell, right? So the Lord is saying that's like your spouse, is that he's trying to get your spouse to be walking on water. And if you picture like a little baby, a little one walking, they kind of walk like they're walking on water, where they walk very careful and it's very they're very cautious and things like that. And they're excited because they're walking, but at the same time it's cautious, like it's kind of nerve-wracking for them too, because it's so, they can't believe they're doing it, something so different, right? And then once they realize they've taken a couple steps, they fall right down on their butt, and then they sit and stop walking, or they crawl back to you or whatever, right? And so the Lord is likening that same scenario to like Peter walking on the water, is that once he realized what he was doing, he was amazed, but then he got nervous and then fell, right? So the Lord is saying that's like your spouse, is that they're walking, but once they become aware that they are, that, and obviously walking is symbolic for journeying to something new, right? Taking steps towards something different, something unknown, something foreign, something that they haven't done yet. Now, they've always been physically capable of doing said things, just like a 1-year-old is physically capable to walk, but if they don't feel ready yet, or they're too nervous or scared or something, then they may absolve from walking or abstain from it, right? And so the Lord is saying that's kind of like your spouse, is that it's nerve-wracking for them. So 1 minute they're walking and taking those cautionary steps, but yet amazed that they're actually doing it for the first time in forever. But other times they default back to crawling because it's more comfortable to them. It's what they're used to, right? So the Lord is at this time working with your spouse to try and push them out of that comfort zone, right? So sometimes you're going to see the just like with the child, sometimes you'll see the child walking, but then other times you'll see the child default back to crawling, right? But eventually, once the child gets a hang of things, they are going to end up walking eventually, right? So that's what the Lord is saying, is that with your spouse, he's working with your spouse to try and get him more comfortable with walking, and that's going to take time, right? Just like with the child, it's going to take time. So the Lord is saying that that's what he's working on with your spouse at this time. And with the counterfeit, he's trying to continue to have the counterfeit continue to keep crawling so that they can eventually get to where they could walk too. And he's just trying to have you, stay in the parameters of what he needs you to stay in, and kind of slow you down a little bit, right, while these other things are going on. And that could maybe be why you're also experiencing maybe a little bit of stagnancy, is because the Lord is trying to slow you down. Because like I said in my last word, you're quite a bit ahead, right? So with that said, that's one thing. Then on the other thing, the Lord is saying that because your spouse is defaulting back to crawling, that's symbolic for defaulting back to comfortability and things that are comfortable to them. And what's comfortable to them is to not settle down, to not commit, and to go back into that default thinking and those default actions, right? And those default actions look like maybe addictions. They look like maybe partying or getting back into sin or things like that, taking two steps forward, one step back, 2 steps forward, one step back type of thing. And so the Lord is saying that because of that, they're not committed to this counterfeit, and nor will they commit to this counterfeit because they're not meant to be with the counterfeit, right? And the Lord also, aside from that, the Lord also has your spouse on this path, and so the Lord is having your spouse have to focus on this at the same time. And yes, they may not, like, they may regress, like I already said about the child going back to crawling. They may regress back, right? It's going to take some time, but the Lord is saying that your spouse may still be distracted with some of the distractions they had in the past, but that the Lord has given them a new distraction via the development that He's putting them through and the newfound path that He has them on. Because, like I was saying, your spouse has been basically crawling for pretty much their whole life. And so just like a baby that's been crawling for 9 months, if they suddenly start walking, it's totally new to them, right? And take some time to switch those gears and develop those muscles and develop that focus and, their brain to start thinking differently and things like that. So with that said, your spouse is falling back into old habits and like old toxic cycles and sinful cycles and things like that. And for that, your spouse is being judged. They'll go under judgment because, like I said, just because the Lord has this plan in action doesn't automatically absolve people from judgment, right? So even with yourself, even though you're not falling back necessarily into old habits or things like that, the devil is trying to get you to pull back. And the Lord is stagnating you at this time to kind of slow you down, and so therefore it's giving the devil an opportunity, or so he thinks, to try to come at you, right? Because you're kind of still at this moment because the Lord has slowed you down. So the devil's like, oh, here's my chance to try and take advantage of this opportunity while they're sitting around waiting, you know what I mean? And so you too, even though you're the main character and you're doing that, you're righteous and you're following the Lord's plan for you, you are still responsible for any things that you may do, right? And so the Lord's saying you could still be under the consequence of judgment, right? And your spouse, because when they're obeying, because obviously we must obey the Lord, right? Otherwise we stand in line for correction, right? So as long as you stay obeying the Lord, you won't fall underneath needing correction, right? Or disciplining. But with your spouse, because they're regressing back, they're receiving correction from the Lord. It's just like when Peter looked down from the Lord and realized what he was doing, the Lord said to Peter, he's like, why did you look away from me, right? He kind of and again, I'm probably paraphrasing, but you know what I mean. He basically reprimanded him for what he did because he took his eyes off of him, right? So if you're taking your eyes off the Lord, He will reprimand you. And if your spouse is taking his eyes off as well and digressing back into old things, the Lord's going to put him or her under judgment as well, right? And this counterfeit, same thing goes. If they're still crawling, the Lord is not going to put them under judgment for crawling per se, because they're going to need more time. But what will qualify for judgment with the counterfeit is if they're doing sinful things. And sinful things look like trying to manipulate, trying to lie, trying to gossip, trying to slander, trying to, steal, whether it be emotionally, mentally, physically, or spiritually, just things like that. Like basically, the Lord is trying to get your spouse and this counterfeit out of operating wickedly. And when you are out of, you're not wicked, you're righteous. But if you are falling into wickedness, the Lord will reprimand you, right? And he's also reprimanding your spouse and this counterfeit if they too fall into wickedness. And so out of all three people, the counterfeit is the most wicked. And so the Lord is saying is that when this counterfeit resorts back to wicked means, they fall under judgment. And they're not the only ones. The Lord is saying is that if there's any other quote unquote supporting characters that come around, now not all these supporting characters are a part of the plan, right? It's just like back to the movie example, is that say the movie's being made, the director, aka the Lord, is say gonna pick his two main characters, his maybe two supporting characters, and then everybody else is just considered extras. They're not really necessary or needed. Some play maybe more of a role than others, but for the most part, all that's really needed, especially for the majority of scenes, is just those two main characters and those like two supporting characters, right? So it depends on everyone's situation is different, but the Lord will have a very small amount of main characters and a very small amount of supporting characters. And if there's more people being brought into this scenario via the counterfeit or via your spouse, and these are people that the Lord considers extras and not really a part of the production or the plan or the of the project, right? Whatever you want to say, then they're going to get cut. They're not necessary, right? And so that's what the Lord is saying is that if this counterfeit is resorting back to wicked means and wicked ways, they're going to fall under judgment. And because everybody has to stay in line, irregardless of their roles and positions. And if they're bringing in extras that aren't necessary, as in extra people to maybe go against you or to try to manipulate your spouse or to do anything that's that's of wickedness, like the Lord is trying to get them away from, then they're going to just go right back under the judgment, right, that they've already been going through. And same thing goes with your spouse. When your spouse keeps his eyes on the Lord and he at least he or she puts in the attempts to be walking, graduating from crawling to walking, and they're trying to symbolically walk away from wickedness, the Lord will, he won't correct them. Like he will, if anything, reward them, right? Because they're being obedient and they're following their plan and path that he has for them. But when they stumble and start to go backwards and regress into old comfortable bad habits, they're going to go under judgment as well. And so these extras that are coming onto the scene, it doesn't matter who brought them on board, they are going to go under judgment because they are trespassing on what the Lord is trying to do. And just like on an actual movie set, if there's trespassers, they're going to be removed, right? They're not going to be entertained. And on the movie set, if the supporting actors or even the main actors, if they're late or they don't show up and do their lines or do their role, they also get reprimanded too, right? And so that's what the Lord is saying, is that he's likened to like the director in this and the producer. So therefore, when you as a main character or your spouse as a main character that's being developed, or the counterfeit as the supporting role, if you all aren't, towing the line, you're not showing up when you're supposed to, you're not, you're distracted, you're not being obedient, things like this, the Lord is going to reprimand you all, right? And so he just also wanted me to put this out and say, because when I closed off last video, he said you forgot to talk about the judgment, and I was like, oh right, sorry, the judgment. So, because that was another part of the first message that I forgot to attach, and so that's what this one's for. So he just wanted me to put out this follow-up message talking about the judgment of that. Just because there's the Lord's grand plan going on doesn't mean that anybody is absolved from judgment, right? And that obviously this counterfeit, because they're considered the more wicked one, they're the one that's going to go through the majority of the judgment, and they're trying to pull your spouse down because they're crawling too, and so they don't want your spouse walking. They want your spouse to be crawling like they are, and so they're trying to pull your spouse down with them. And so the Lord is saying that your spouse is in between. They can walk and come towards you, or they can regress back to crawling and get down on their knees again, basically like bowing down to the devil, like this counterfeit has been. And if they do that, then the Lord is going to put the counterfeit and your spouse under judgment. And anybody that this counterfeit or your spouse are bringing into the mix for whatever reason, if it's stemming from a wicked angle, which it most likely is, considering the situation, then those extra people will also be put under judgment as well. Because the Lord's not entertaining anything. Just like how I gave the example from the Bible where the Lord reprimanded Peter when he took his eyes off the Lord, right? So the Lord is saying is that, everybody has to follow their role that the Lord has delegated for them. And there's no regressing. This counterfeit can't, as long as the Lord is aware the counterfeit's going to crawl, but if the counterfeit is crawling and trying to go back to wicked ways for you and your spouse, the Lord is going to judge that accordingly, right? And as long as your spouse continues to work on walking and then eventually running and moving forward, then they will, then the Lord will be, happy with them, basically. But if they continue to keep falling down and going back to crawling and falling down and going back and basically going back to their sin, and then they will too, they will just continuously be under judgment when that happens. And also you as well, the Lord knows that you're way past crawling and you're no longer bowing on your knees down to Satan, and you are, walking and running at this point now with ease. If, you start to slip off or whatever, then you too can go under judgment, as we already know, right? So, yeah, so that's another thing too, is that the Lord just wanted me to kind of like warn whoever may come across that he wants you to continue to keep your eyes forward on him, and to do otherwise could mean a stumble, like with Peter walking on the water, and therefore subsequently could mean a reprimand. And the Lord also expects the same from your spouse in this counterfeit. And if they disobey that, then they are going to go under judgment as well, right? And so are any other extras that may come into this production that the Lord is trying to do. They also will go under judgment, right? So there will be no other option for everyone involved but to keep their eyes on the Lord, focus on him, obey his plan and his course of action, and to move accordingly. There, that's all there is to it, point blank period. And so anyways, if there's more that the Lord gives me on this, like if he gives me more revelation on this, I will of course come back and do another word. But I think that this is good for now. It's getting late. So again, I hope this finds who it needs to find. I hope it blesses you, and God bless.